Hello, I'm Hannah Barnes, Associate Editor at The New Statesman, and you're listening to The New Statesman podcast. For the next 6 weeks, we're bringing you new episodes every weekday with updates on the party campaigns, reaction from around the UK, and the best polling analysis with our experts. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Freddie Hayward, political correspondent, and Rachel Cunliffe, our Associate Political Editor. We're going to get into what the political parties are trying to get us to talk about today, but really one story dominating, that of veteran Labour MP Diane Abbott, who has served as the Labour MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington since 1987, when she was the first black woman to be elected to Parliament. We touched on it yesterday, story broken by the BBC, that in fact this investigation into her was completed in December, some 5 or 6 months ago. She has been doing the rounds this morning, off mic, off camera, but speaking to journalists, saying she understands that she's been barred by the party from standing, although she has had the whip returned. At lunchtime, Sir Keir Starmer says, not so. She's not been barred. No decision's been taken. I mean, it's been a real mess, hasn't it? This is not going down well.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's been embarrassing, I'd say. It's the first bad moment in Labour's campaign so far. It's not gone according to plan. That's partly because they've had a few leaks to the press. There was a story in the Times last night that said that she wasn't going to be able to stand, and that's preempting the NEC, the National Executive Committee's decision, which is, I think, is going to come next week or later this week. The hard cut-off for Labour candidates is June 7th, so they're going to have to decide before then. So I think Keir Starmer, he didn't really deny the story, he just said a decision technically had not yet been made. I think that's because they're waiting for this NEC decision, which will come, and I think we expect them to essentially say that there's no way in which Diane Abbott can stand as a Labour MP. The broader question is what they want to happen here. I think it seemed as if there was a plan to restore the whip to Diane Abbott, bearing in mind she's been out in the cold for over a year now. I think it was April last year when she first sent that letter to the Observer, which undermined racism against Jewish people and Irish people. And she's been under investigation since then. She's not had the whip. That means she's not part of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
It's a long time, isn't it? 13 months?
It is a long time, and particularly because we saw other investigations into other MPs progress much more quickly. We saw Andy McDonald, for instance. There was an investigation into something that he said, and I think that was around 5 months. So they're different timeframes, and there was growing anger within the Labour Party, particularly after you had those comments from the Tory donor Frank Hester, when he said that there were leaked comments from, I think it was from a few years ago, but they were released in March this year, where he said that Diane Abbott should be shot. That released a big rise in sympathy and concern amongst Labour MPs that she should be reinstated. You had people like Harriet Harman, the former acting leader, come out and said the whip should be restored, which is separate to the disciplinary process. That's up to Keir Starmer.
We had those extraordinary scenes, didn't we, in the Commons that day where Diane Abbott found herself being talked about while she was sitting in the chamber, standing up 40 times, I think it was.
Standing up to ask a question, and all these MPs were getting up to speak about her, but she wasn't able to speak for herself. And that was in part because she wasn't part of the Parliamentary Labour Party at that time. So yeah, it was weird, and it was also renewed questions about her. A couple of weeks ago, time ceases to have all meaning when there's an election going on. But when Natalie Elphicke was allowed to cross the floor, go from being really quite a right-wing Tory MP to be welcomed onto the Labour benches, and a lot of people asked the, I think, justified question, OK, if the Parliamentary Labour Party is a broad enough church that you could have Natalie Elphicke, why can't you have Diane Abbott?
And lots of Labour commentators and MPs talking about bringing that back up again today, the Natalie Elphicke situation.
Completely, and that sort of leads into the broader question about whether this is a factional decision, and people are quite certain that it is. I was speaking to some Labour MPs this morning. They're sad, they're angry. I think there's a general sense that it's impossible to have a completely independent process within a political party, not least because Keir Starmer, as the leader, has a majority on the NEC of his supporters. So he might say, I'm not involved at all, but his supporters have a majority on the leading body that's going to make these decisions. So it's always going to be a little bit factional. People are suggesting if she was a member of the right of the party and she said the same things or something similar, would she have been treated in the same way? It's a counterfactual. And I think this points to a broader problem for Labour. Right now in the campaign, we don't know how much this is going to cut through. It's obviously distracted from some of the things they wanted to talk about today. But I think it presages a bigger problem for Labour, which is in government. How are they going to maintain party discipline in Parliament then when they're already losing a bit of political capital, a bit of goodwill amongst their shadow ministers and MPs at the moment?
But serious issue for Keir Starmer on this particular very narrow issue of Diane Abbott as well, because he did say as recently as last week that the investigation has not been concluded. Now, that does appear to not be so. And hearing Wes Streeting doing the rounds today saying, oh, I don't want to go on media hearsay. Well, it's not media hearsay. It was Sir Keir Starmer's actual words. I mean, it doesn't look that good, does it?
No, I think there are sort of two options that Keir Starmer could go down with this. One, he could say that the process in its entirety hadn't been completed, even though the majority of it, including the decision that she had to take an antisemitism awareness course, had been concluded. Well, that's sort of weasel words, isn't it? And quite misleading. The other thing he could say is that it's all being handled by other people who he has nothing to do with, and he's sort of taken an arm's length view, and therefore he didn't know. I think a number of people would say if you don't know what's going on in your own party, that doesn't say wonderful things about your level of competence. I think, as Freddie said, it's very clear what Labour HQ were trying to achieve with this. They were trying to come to some kind of stage-managed compromise where she would be able to have the whip restored and decide on her own terms, announce that she was standing down after 37 years with dignity, but she wouldn't be a candidate. And you can see why they don't want her to be a candidate, again, for two reasons. One is she's a bit of a liability, because her letter to the Observer 13 months ago really was quite shocking, and there's no guarantee that she wouldn't say something inconvenient again. And then you've got members of the shadow cabinet being asked on a daily basis, do you agree with whatever it is that Diane Abbott has said? And the other reason is that Labour's campaign, particularly Morecambe McSweeney, they want to distance themselves as much from the Jeremy Corbyn era that Diane Abbott is very closely associated with as possible, and having her not stand as a candidate is helpful for that. So you can see what they were trying to achieve. I think it was that leak late on Tuesday night to the Times that really scuppered everything, because then they were put in a position of having to say, well, what got decided when? Has she been barred? Hasn't she? And the beautifully graceful, stage-managed, compromised exit went out the window.
Yeah, and love her or loathe her, one can't help but feel that 37 years of service, quite an extraordinary political career, an extraordinary political woman, and all the abuse she's received, that she probably did deserve that dignified exit. Now, I mean, we've touched on it already, this element of factionalism. At the weekend, we saw, well, last couple of days really, we've seen a number of Labour grandees step down. Harriet Harman, Margaret Hodge, several over the weekend. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I mean, the numbers are quite staggering. 131 MPs, 77 Conservatives and 30 Labour MPs have announced they're not going to stand in the next election. Looking at Labour first, there was this allegation sort of doing the rounds, wasn't there, that they've left it so late so that the party machine can drop in their favoured candidates and take that power away from the local constituencies. I mean, is there much truth in that, do you think?
It always seems the case that leadership at an election will ask people to wait until the campaign kicks off, because then they have much more leverage to impose a candidate, because they'll say, well, we've not got enough time, we have to take the decision for you, we can't consult the party in the same way that we would normally do. I mean, they did the same thing with Jeremy Corbyn's constituency. They imposed someone without consulting the party. They restricted the shortlist. There was going to be a vote, and then it turned out later that day, I think some of the members of the local CLP found out via the media that the candidate, who's a private health care business owner, had been imposed on that constituency. So that's what you see. You're going to see, they've got a few more days, we're going to see some of those final selections fill up. The Tories, it sounds as if they're quite far behind Labour. Labour have obviously been preparing for this for a very long time. They've got those lists. There's always a bit of negotiations, let's say, about trying to get those seats, particularly if they're safer seats. Those who are close to the leadership will be hoping to push their case forwards and get one of those seats.
And Rachel, on the Conservative side, I mean, it's the largest exodus of
Ever.
Yeah. Of course, big names there, Michael Gove, Andrea Leadsom, Theresa May. They're going to need now to select, I think it is around 150 candidates by the 7th of June deadline.
Yeah.
I mean,
You should do it. We should all do it.
Ian Dale of LBC fame is going to run as candidate in Tunbridge Wells. But to be serious, though, I mean, how to do this at such short notice? I mean, what impact is that going to have on the quality of candidates? And really, realistically, how much vetting they're going to be able to do? Is this setting up all these,
so it's
problems for the future?
It's really interesting that the party facing a more chaotic selection process with more seats to fill and more scrambling over getting candidates is the party that called the election. And this comes back to what we were talking about when the election was first called, which is that Rishi Sunak really did take the rest of his party by surprise. And a lot of local Conservative associations are really quite angry with him for that, because they were told they had more time. They were told that they could regroup after the locals, sort out their candidate selections, replenish their campaign finances, and also just take a bit of a rest. And now it's go
on holiday, indeed, if you're Steve Baker.
Steve Baker, who is a catamaran sailing in Greece at the moment, I believe. Good for him. So it is chaotic, and Labour have been preparing their selection lists. They were ready for a May election in case that happened. So they are sort of perversely more ready for this than the Conservatives are. But I think both the party, because the sheer number of people who are standing down and seats to fill, and obviously the other parties as well, are going to have real difficulty making sure that they do proper vetting, particularly as vetting has got more difficult in the age of social media. Someone can just set all their social media to private, and then the vetting process takes a look. Yeah, it's okay, and then it comes out after they've been selected as a candidate that they said some quite not nice things in the past. I think we as a society, and political parties specifically, are going to have to get better at working out how we deal with that. Does someone's tweets when they were 17 disqualify them from standing for an MP forever? Depends how bad they were, I guess. We don't know. We haven't had that conversation yet. But I would be staggered if there weren't some really big embarrassments in terms of candidate selection on all sides, simply because of the numbers involved.
Now, before we move on to our very serious analysis of what the parties wanted us to be talking about today, I don't think we can let the biggest comedy moment of the campaign so far pass. And that, of course, was Sir Ed Davey on Lake Windermere, falling off his paddleboard. Not once, not twice, 5 times.
We're doing this as a podcast, but I would just advise everyone to go look at the range of photos, the range of facial expressions, the range of positions with arms flailing. It was joy during what is already turning out to be quite an exhausting and grueling campaign.
He did the same at Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth last year. I remember getting
fell
on
off
his
a paddleboard.
No, getting on his kayak and just sort of, oh no, I've fallen in. I think the Lib Dems are obviously trying to get some media coverage, and I respect that they do so in any way that they can. Particularly 5 times, unbelievable. I think.
Well, it's funny you should say that. He's admitted he did it on purpose. I mean,
There
what
you
would
go.
possess the man to do such a thing?
Wasn't he up on Lake Windermere, which is in the news because it's
of
full of sewage?
Poo.
Yeah.
I mean, what a weird thing to do. Right. Moving
That
swiftly on.
man really, really wants to be the third leader of the third biggest party, doesn't he? He really wants that question at PMQs every week.
Right, now, what Labour obviously wanted us to be talking about today was the NHS, and really a pretty bold offering. Some punchy lines from Wes Streeting this morning. Don't give the matches back to the arsonists being the Conservative Party. But really strong pledge from Labour to clear the Tory backlog of NHS waiting lists, 40,000 extra appointments a week, which sounds a lot, but it's not really when you consider how many appointments there are in the NHS, and getting waiting times back to 18 weeks. Now, that seems, on the face of it, a really big target to meet. Do you think it's doable?
I don't think there's that much new in this announcement today. What they're trying to do is have a day about the NHS. They're trying to say to people, this is what we care about. We know you care, so therefore vote for us. It's the top of voters' priorities at the moment. There are quite a few things that have already been announced. The 40,000 extra appointments has been Labour Party policy for a while. They put it all together. Wes Streeting's been talking about scanners and technology and AI in the NHS for years. They've been talking about the biggest expansion of NHS staff for years. So they're packaging it. They're saying, look, this is our plan, our first steps that we're going to take to bring down the backlog that's increased hugely during the pandemic, but also they're arguing since the Tories came in.
Yeah, I think it's a way for them to speak very passionately about an issue that is top of the list of voter concerns, point out how bad things have got under the Conservatives, but be very careful about making too many specific pledges that prove too ambitious when they actually have to do the work of fulfilling them.
I mean, it's no secret that the majority of NHS staff would tend to be Labour voters as opposed to Conservative. The junior doctors have announced a 5-day strike during this election campaign today, 27th of June to the 2nd of July. Both Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer have said, look, we can't give you 35%, the demand that they've been making for quite some time now, 35% pay rise, but we want to get round the table with you. Do you see anything significant in the decision to strike during an election campaign? Is that a pure political attack on the Conservative Party, do you think?
I don't think it really works in the favour of either of the parties. Obviously, it's problematic for the Conservatives because you've got a major public service not working in the week before the election, and if the message to voters is these guys have broken everything, it's a very clear sign that something is very broken. But it's not that helpful to Labour either, because as you say, Labour aren't going to be able to find the money at the level that the junior doctors want, and that means that the last week of the campaign is going to be dominated by them being asked that question: would you give in? How much would you give them? How would you pay for it? If you're not going to give in, what stops this kind of thing happening again when you're in government? And I don't think that's the conversation that Labour wants to be having the week before the election either.
Just on that, I think Labour have created an expectation in the past 2 years that they would handle the strikes in a much better way than the Conservative government are doing or have done. And I think the expectation, therefore, is that there won't be as many strikes. Whether they deal with that through negotiations or higher pay rises, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just they want to get a slightly less antagonistic relationship, but the expectation is definitely there. So I think Rachel's right. If they do win in 5 weeks' time, then there'll be the instant expectation that they deal with it, and that's a political problem for them.
And just to wrap up today, you've already written about this, Rachel. The Conservatives' announcement today,
they're going to war with students.
Going to war. Well, is that promising to take away 1 in 8 degree courses, calling them Mickey Mouse courses, but they won't say which ones they are?
Yeah.
You think it's war with students?
Well, I think it's more posturing, essentially. Cracking down on low-quality, low-value university courses has been something that various Conservative governments have been very excited to talk about. 2 years ago, I interviewed Michelle Donnellan, the universities minister at the time, who talked to me very proudly about how she was the first person in her family to be able to go to university, obviously hugely subsidised by the taxpayer, and then said the next minute that she didn't think university was right for everyone, other people's children shouldn't do it. What they've said is they're going to crack down on low value courses and divert the money into creating 100,000 more apprenticeships. The numbers don't really add up because if they're cracking down on 1 in 8, I think that's 130,000 places that could be at risk for 100,000 apprenticeships. So already that's 30,000 fewer opportunities for young people. But also the main bottleneck for apprenticeships, which Labour is also very keen on promoting, the bottleneck isn't lack of providers, it's lack of employers wanting to partner with the providers in order to offer those courses. So I worry that it looks quite a lot like the Conservatives, again, taking something away from young people, and in particular, a message to parents: we're going to make it harder for your child to go to university. I'm not sure that's a particularly compelling message.
I mean, pretty fascinating series of posts on Twitter by the CEO of Universities UK this morning, Vivian Stern, who's managed to find quite quickly many holes in this argument. Again, pointing out the lack of employers as a problem, but also that actually some university courses are indeed apprenticeships. The two aren't mutually exclusive. And really, should we solely measure the success of a degree course on how much someone goes on to earn?
Well, exactly.
People choose their careers for very many different reasons, not necessarily how much money they can make.
And the argument that the Conservatives have been making is that 1 in 5 graduates would be financially better off not having gone to university. That is in part because of the high fees, and particularly the high interest rate on university courses. That means people leave university, graduates, with £40,000 worth of debt that most of them are repaying for much of their working lives. So there are questions there about what university is for, who should pay for it, are people getting value for money, are people getting the information they need to make that decision, what are the alternatives, do we have enough apprenticeships for people who don't want to go to university, what are we going to do about the fact that many universities are relying on fees from overseas students, which can be much higher, which subsidise domestic students. How are they going to figure all that out if foreign student visas are dramatically cut, which is another Conservative Party policy? Loads of questions, but I don't think clampdown on Mickey Mouse degrees to fund apprenticeships really fixes any of them in a particularly compelling manner. But I would say that because I study classics, and that's obviously a useless degree.
Just quickly.
Me and Boris Johnson.
What a pair. Just quickly on that, isn't it? It's fascinating that we've had this debate now in the campaign. I think there has been a big shift in how people view universities, their funding, as you were saying. John Major, the Tory Prime Minister in the 90s, who allowed polytechnic colleges to become universities. Tony Blair said he wanted to send 50% of kids to universities, and that's switched now. And I think you've seen a recognition that maybe that expansion didn't go as well as some would hope. That's certainly the view in the Conservative Party. I think there are questions as well for Labour about tuition fees and how they're going to make what is essentially a graduate tax at the moment slightly more progressive than it already is. So the debate's shifted, but I think you're right, Rachel, the answers aren't there.
And potentially a difficult argument to swallow for young people coming from politicians who themselves have tended to benefit from a university education.